Okay, so let's have a walkthrough for administrators for the workflow of if your organization has an online sign-up form connected to your website. So for instance, volunteers will go to your website and there'll be a volunteer sign-up or registration form. That registration form then will generate an email that you'll receive in some organizations several times daily with new volunteer information. So what I've done on the right-hand side is a simulation of what that email might look like. There's some information here that says you have a new volunteer, here's their name, and here's the email address they registered with. There may be some other data such as date of birth. And how do we add them to the system? What's an easy workflow? So let's walk through that. As the administrator of the organization, I go to volunteers, and what I'd like to do is to add this volunteer directly to the system. Now, if they already have a Here2Volunteer account, that information is important. We don't want to create a new one. So the best way to do that is let's go ahead and start with their email address. Very easy. Let's just copy and paste. Let's put it in here. Let's click on Add. Now, what we'd like to do in this particular case is add them to the orientation pending roster. So that's a decision we made as an organization. All new intakes will be put into orientation pending, and then if they pass the necessary processes, like there might be a screening process and they need to sign waivers, then we'll put them on that orientation pending list, and then they'll be able to schedule themselves for an orientation session. So that's our first choice. Let's select that, click OK. Now, I know that this volunteer at this email address has not registered before, so let's just go ahead and create that account. In this case, it's just fictional information, first name and last name, and let's go ahead and create that. So we have CCH001. Now what we can see here is since there's a green unlock icon, then I'm able to edit as the organization. And what I'd like to do is first of all create their username. So I'll copy and paste the email address into the username, and that way the account will become active. They'll be able to log in. Let's generate a quick pin while we're here. The other thing is information from the email. Say, for example, maybe there are some interests, or maybe we want to enter their date of birth, or maybe we need to put in some emergency contact information. In the administration, the agency notepad, everyone that's an administrator will be able to see the information here, which is why emergency contact could be put here. The notepad specifically for me as an administrator, my own private notepad, I wouldn't want to put that information in here because that's only visible to me. But anyone that's an administrator on the account would be able to see the agency notepad, which means none of the volunteers, of course, but anyone that could log in as an agency would be able to see that. So we could add all of that information here, and then we'd have it stored for future. If we're worried about space, this box will actually stretch out to whatever size we'd like. Once we've set that basic information, let's go ahead and click Save. Now what we've done is we've actually created the volunteer account. Okay, so the next step, we've created their account in Here2Volunteer, but they don't know that yet, and they don't know their username, and they're not able to log in yet. So we need to take that next step. So let's go into the roster and have a look and see the orientation pending roster. We can see that one volunteer is green. That volunteer has already accepted the roster and added themselves. Volunteer 001 does not know about the roster yet. So what we'd like to do is invite them to the roster, and that will send out an email to them to invite. And then we'd also like them to create a password. We'll tell them their username so that they'll be able to log in themselves. So that important step is to click on the name of the volunteer that you'd like to invite, click on invite, and let's click OK, and we'll wait for that email. Okay. Now you'll notice that the color has changed to gold. And what that means is that we've invited them to the roster. Started as black. Green will be the change that we see once they've accepted the invitation to the roster. So let's now wait and go ahead and check the email. Okay, now that we've received the email, let's take a look at that. Let's click here. So we can see that this is from Community Care Bedrock. So your organization's name will be at the top, and the username is the one that we created, ideally an email address. And it says Community Care Bedrock invites you to be on the orientation pending roster. Using Here2Volunteer.com to organize and plan staffing needs. Fred Flintstone. So if you are the person that's logged in administration, your name will be included. From Community Care Bedrock asks that you accept the invitation so you can be included in staffing plans. So this puts it back to the volunteer for them to go ahead and accept the invitation and to log in and create a password so they can see. Now let's go ahead. I'll need to log out of this. And I'll just close that altogether. And let's go ahead and accept the invitation and see what that looks like on behalf of the volunteer. So let's take a look at this. Okay. Let's have a look at these things. So knowing that who we do, that the username is cchvolunteer001 @gmail, I've just copied that. The volunteer will click on activate. Now, the next step is that the volunteer, since they don't have a password, they'll need to create one. And we just do that through the forgot password link. Click on that, enter the username, which the volunteer will be able to copy and paste, and they'll submit. And in this case, since it's an email address, that's where the email will be sent for the password reset. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now that the volunteer has received that password reset, let's take a look at that. Quite simple, pretty standard. From Here2Volunteer, here's your username. This email lets you set your password. If they click on that, they go ahead and set it. So let's create a password of at least 8 characters, 1 capital, 1 small letter, and 1 number. Once they've set that, they can go ahead and log in. So now we remember that that's their username and the password they just created. And they will be able to log in for the first time, which is great. It's been successful. You can see their volunteer's name is at the top. This is a volunteer account, so they have 5 options down the left side. And most importantly, they're able to see the orientation shifts that we've set up, and we'd like for them to select one. So the volunteers then would go in on a date that's convenient for them, and they can see these shift instructions that you set, and they can go ahead and sign up. So I'll log out of this and we'll look at what that looks like on the organization side. Okay, so let's now have a look from the organization. We're logged in again as Community Care. And if I go to the rosters, I can see in the orientation pending that it's now turned green and the status is accepted. So the volunteer has seen that. Let's look and see what our shifts look like. CCH001 has joined our orientation shift on January 18th, so we can see that. We also know that since it's limited to 7, 6 more people could sign up for that shift before it disappeared. So as an organization, we're happy to see that the volunteer is able to interact with the system, and of course they'll be notified 30 minutes or 90 minutes before that shift as a reminder as well. And there are videos that we have prepared to motivate volunteers to set those notifications, and we'd also like them to download the app on their Android or iOS. So now that we're set here, let's go ahead and look at what the next part of the workflow is. Okay, so let's say that we just completed orientation last weekend, the volunteer did a good job, and we're comfortable then that we can add them to a list. Let's see what that flow might look like. Let's go back to roster editor. So orientation pending allows volunteers to see those orientation shifts. Once they've completed the orientation, then we don't need them to sign up for those shifts anymore. In fact, we don't want them to even see those. So what we do is we would move volunteers who've completed orientation onto, say, our orientation complete roster and off of the orientation pending roster. Let's show you what that looks like. So let's click on orientation complete. Now orientation complete is actually my destination. I want to take from orientation pending. So let's just click on swap and we'll switch left side, right side here. So you can see orientation pending. We will move everything always left to right to orientation complete. Let's click on volunteer 001 and let's actually move them. And what they'll do is disappear from orientation pending, and now they're on orientation complete. And that's an important step because they'll no longer be able to see the orientation shifts. Okay, so the next step then is from the orientation complete roster, where would we like to put them in the organization? So let's go back to the actual volunteers themselves. We knew that CCH Volunteer 001 has just completed orientation successfully, which means they're ready to do shifts and see shifts available in the organization. Let's go back to their account. We can see now that they're on the orientation complete roster. But what we'd do then is we'd look in their notepad and we'd see what their interests are. And let's say something in here, one of the interest was they're interested in the reading program. And when we look at that information, since they've completed orientation, what we might just do is put them on the Saturday reading roster, which means any shifts available for people that have that interest then would be available to them. Since the orientation complete roster is now finished, I'll take them off that. And that'll make it easier for me every time I've completed orientation to move my volunteers on and off of lists. So now I know that this volunteer has completed everything that's necessary and they're ready to volunteer. In fact, now any shifts available to Saturday reading are going to be available for that volunteer. And of course, we can add them to other lists, rosters as well, and then they will then be able to see shifts that are available for that interest. So this is what we see as the workflow from volunteers actually completing an online form in your organization to actually getting shifts and signing themselves up for volunteering in your organization.